It's it starts with, "Sir, you have already discovered me absent," which is already like, listen, look, I know you looking, and I'm not there. My man, I'm gone, and not only am I not coming back, but let me tell you a couple of things about your workplace. And then on the other side, every word might as well be a curse word, because they're like, he told me he wants his son to paint. Are you? He wants him to paint, and he's gonna do math.
He's going to school
He's
right
going to
now.
school. He's going to school at me. Do you understand that? He's going to school at me right now. I can't feel it. I don't know where he is, but he's going to school. He wrote me a letter. That shouldn't even be possible. Who taught him to write letters?
Run, Mary, run. Run, Martha, run. Run, Mary, run, I say. You've got a right to the tree of life. You've got a right to the tree of life, yeah.
I like to think that I do black satire. Like I do satire, and I am black. So I think I'm contributing. I hope.
Yeah. And I have listened to your comedy, so I feel like you are black and you do satire, and you do satire about being black. Therefore, you do black
I
satire.
think I'm checking all the boxes.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's like a Venn diagram, right? Like,
Yeah.
like one of the bits you do that like I come back to is what happens when the formerly enslaved person, meets their former enslaver after the war on the street. Right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Where did that joke come from? Like, what was the inspiration?
I think that one day I really did. I grew up in Louisiana, and I've passed like Confederate monuments. I've passed like all of these different sort of odes to that time, and I think that one day I was just thinking about the fact that, I mean, forget the fact that a lot of these were erected long after Reconstruction and everything, but like in general, a lot of people, when you hear stories of Chicago and New York and everything like that, there wasn't this like great migration when you think it was. So the Civil War happened, and there were a lot of black people that stayed, and like this is their home, or then they maybe were able to cut some deal and essentially buy the land off of the former plantation owner or something. So there were all these instances of people staying, and I was like, well, staying would be very awkward. That'd be deeply, because the people who lost also aren't moving, because where are they going to move? Where are they going to go? Are they going to go to Mexico? They can't go up north. And then the South is just South. So the whole thing is just rubble and wreckage. And so then after a deep conflict like that, where nobody changed their mind, it's just people just kept getting shot in the face. And so then eventually the losing side was like, you got us, like, please just stop shooting us, and we'll just try to go back to normal. But there's no normal. And so you're running into people who maybe tangentially you would have had some relation to, whether it's through the institution of slavery or just through how the circles you used to run in, and so that also goes to that idea of that brother against brother thing, where it's like they're family. Like, if you think that, and this is not as much a black thing, I find. Like, it's more my white friends that deal with this, of like going home for Thanksgiving and dealing with their racist uncle. It's like, imagine that Thanksgiving. The Thanksgiving after the Civil War must have been terrible. It must have just been people sitting around the table, a bunch of them missing like limbs and stuff like that, trying to like pass the potatoes or something, and then
Or like you mentioned relations, like think about the former enslaver meeting his son, who was his slave, on the street. And now son's thinking about what happened to his mother. Son's thinking about what happened to his sister. And now they're meeting on the street with no guardrails. right? Or they're meeting on the street where, for like that brief moment, talking brief moment from 65 to say 78 before white Southerners crack down, right? That son, formerly enslaved person, is in the state legislature or is on his way to Congress and is now not just like former slave, but also like congressperson.
Yeah, yeah. You and in some capacity or other, you're calling him sir, and it's gotta be like a shift of worlds almost, you know, like that because the thing that people forget, I think, especially me, until I like had to relearn it, essentially, is that brief period was this incredible moment that, oh, if we just kept doing that, things would be totally different now. You know what I mean? Like before, sadly, you just needed to keep the military occupation, and then we would have been doing great. They would have never left, but would have been killing it.
There were 3 Black elected senators, one from Louisiana, actually, who didn't get seated, 2 from Mississippi who did, a slew of Congress people from Southern states. I think the last one was in office in the 1880s, and you don't get another one until the 1920s or 30s, and they're from New York and Illinois. You don't get another Black congressperson from like Mississippi or Louisiana until the 70s or 80s.
You mentioned satire earlier, and I think that it is an interesting thing. I'm trying to think of the best way to put this. So even in like those old monarchies, they would have a setup in court where like the jester was the only one that was allowed to tell the truth, and they did it with jokes, but it's like as soon as a jester wasn't allowed in a court, you actually knew the king was a tyrant, if that makes sense. And I think that's actually how people's minds work. So taking it from like monarchy, everything, just breaking it down to the individual, people are also that way. Like if you cannot joke with a person or get them to see something by making light of it, you're dealing with a person who's like unmovable and in a way that's like not positive. Whereas when you bring in satire, both for the masses and to an individual, over a subject that they wouldn't otherwise know how to tackle, it opens up a way of seeing things that leads to better conversation than you would have had otherwise. I think sometimes when you just try to attack it with the holding up the mirror really close to the face, I think any sort of social commentary or blatant calling out of misdeeds on a grand scale is a lot like when you open your phone. Do you ever open your phone's camera and it's reversed so you see your face and it's too close? I don't even know why they allow that it's criminally close to your face. It's so upset. You ever open your phone and you think you're about to take a picture of your friends and it's just your face and you're like way too close to the camera? That's what any sort of, especially now in a time where we've really dug our heels in politically, socially, to every idea that we have. People are mostly ideology now as opposed to being individuals that move through them. And so I find that satire is a way to disarm, and it's a way to, hold the mirror up, but hold it up much further away to where people can see themselves and they can see everything behind them. And I think that when you do that, people are less likely to have their guard up. They're less likely to even realize that they're being taught or told about something that they would normally have shut out. And so I think that satire is incredibly important to activism and to furthering conversation.
No, I hear what you're saying, especially on the front of like satire and comedy being a way to critique, especially those who are closest to you, who might not be in a position to receive that critique in a way, right? So we've been talking a lot about the relationship between enslaved people and enslavers, race, etc. But the thing I'm thinking about now is the ways that Black women used humor and satire to critique sort of Black men for exclusionary practices, even within the community, right? So I mentioned Frances Harper. Frances Harper was a major supporter of Underground Railroad activity. She donated money. We don't know the extent to which she was actively involved, as in helping ferry people, that sort of thing. She writes to William Still and says, I wish I could do more, but, I'm often sort of in ill health and I'm frail, but I'm going to do whatever I can, right? And so she's all over the place. She's going to conventions, she's giving speeches. But when you look at, Black activists held conventions like publicly on a national and state level from the 1830s forward. They're gathering in churches and sort of state houses, etc. And there would be Black men and Black women there, and Black women were there not just supporting, but actively doing the work, funding the work, circulating the newspapers, writing the things, but they never got sort of actual recognition. They could never vote in a convention. They could never be a convention president. And so Harper in 1859, 1860 writes a series of sketches she calls Fancy Sketches. And it's basically her character, who's named Jane Rustic, is supposed to be the kind of simple country girl hanging out with the city sort of bougie folk and lampooning the bougie folk, right? So she's talking about the tomfoolery of a man all dressed up saying that he would join slave rebellion as soon as the slaves started. And she's like, when was the last time you saw a fugitive? You would cross the street if you saw a fugitive walking your way. Right? But one of the things Jane Rustic dreams about is a convention whose purpose is to blot out the sun. And it's called the Anti-Sunshine Convention, acronym ASS for short. And they pass resolutions where we believe that the sun is unwholesome and we're going to ask the clouds to block it out. We believe that women should not be able to participate unless it's to raise money. We believe X, Y, and Z. And she sort of uses this in the same newspaper, in the same magazine that publishes the Wilson piece, right? It's the same sort of people, to talk about all the ways that sort of Black men have crowded out Black women. And it's like trying to blot out the sun. If you're trying to blot out Black women's participation, it's as asinine as trying to cover the sun. And she does this throughout. She writes a poem in Reconstruction about Aunt Chloe. And there's this kind of you talked about humor as a way to sort of get a message across that might not get across, right? Harper uses poetry and humor as a way to stab the knife in and then twist a little bit. So Aunt Chloe's enslaver sold her children away. And then the war happens and this woman's own children go to fight in the Civil War for the Confederacy and they die. And Aunt Chloe's sort of yeah, Mrs. sold my children away, but guess whose child came back home? And it's just kind of that's messed up. Just on a really basic level. I can't believe Harper writes this in a poetry, and at the same time, this is where we started, right? You kind of understand. This is a woman who's tortured you, sold your children away, profited off of not just your manual labor, but if you're Aunt Chloe, the labor of your womb, right? Yeah. So how do you mark that in a way that doesn't seem so vindictive? So she uses that kind of so winking, twinkling in the eye, twist in the language to do it.
Yeah, with really dark jokes. That's how you do it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Almost on the level of too much, but really on the level of
she's got you there. Yeah, it's like one of those things where you have that second step where you're
you see this throughout Underground Railroad writing. William Steele has people writing to him under the name Ham and Eggs. It's like, I've got a few good parcels coming your way. Some hams, I got a few good hams and eggs that came my way. I'm sending them up to you. Like, you get in the middle of, I think this man is in Virginia. So he's like in the heat of it. He's still cooking up, you know, finding little ways. But like the thing about former enslavers meeting their formerly enslaved people, this stuff actually happened quite a bit. You get letters from like a formerly enslaved person talking about their enslavement, or correspondences between the two. So like William Steele has a collection of Underground Railroad letters. It's William Steele's Underground Railroad. And he features a letter from a formerly enslaved man who's writing about his former enslaver, who happens to be an old widowed white woman. And in the newspapers in the 1850s, they're playing up this image of this old widow who has lost her two most valuable pieces of property that would have gone for about $1,200 a piece. And like, poor lady, they've stolen away her money. Please return them. And there are people writing on her behalf to these two men who are now free, asking them to please come back. And one of them is like, instead of weeping over the sad situation of his penniless mistress and showing any signs of contrition, James actually feels rejoiced in the Lord for his liberty and is very much pleased in Toronto, but is not satisfied yet. He is even concocting a plan to get his wife back. The other one writes back and it's like, yeah, if she dies, I'm good with that. She owes me money.
Yeah, I mean, here's the thing. I've only read a couple of those letters ever, and they're all way too nice. Like when you think about the letter and you think about, it's essentially your exit interview from slavery, right? Like you're sending a letter to your former enslaver, and it's just filled with like, I know that maybe you miss me, probably not for the reasons that you should, not my company or anything. It's like they're all so cordial that I was like blown away. And it actually makes them way funnier letters to read, because then like, I'm trying to remember, there was one that I think that you sent to me to read, right? There was one, I'm trying to remember the name of the person. Let me see.
It's William J. Wilson bit.
I think so because it starts with, "Sir, you have already discovered me absent," which is already like, listen, look, I know you looking, and I'm not there. My man, I'm gone, and not only am I not coming back, but let me tell you a couple of things about your workplace, and then just goes into this wild. And this is what's so crazy about the two worlds again, is that to one person, they're just talking about their unalienable rights. They're just like, hey, I'm going to learn to read. I'm going to get good at math. And then I'm going to make sure my kid knows how to paint if he wants to paint. Like that's like the whole vibe that they're putting out. And then on the other side, every word might as well be a curse word, because they're like, he told me he wants his son to paint. He wants him to paint, and he's going to do math. He's going to school. He's going to school. He's going to school at me. Do you understand that? He's going to school at me right now. I can't feel it. I don't know where he is, but he's going to school. He wrote me a letter. That shouldn't even be possible. Who taught him to write letters? Right. And the diction, the way he's talking, he sounds like us. This is crazy. Who taught them that? Because that's also got to be the scary thing if you're an enslaver, and then like maybe a month out of someone getting their freedom or running away through the Underground Railroad or something, they send you a letter back that's like great punctuation. Just, you're like, it took me my whole life to get this good with a pen, and this guy's been gone like a month.
Yeah, this is Lewis Hayden you're talking about, who Fun, not so fun fact, his enslaver was the great Henry Clay, also known as former Speaker of the House of Representatives, also former presidential candidate out of Kentucky. So it's not like any regular old enslaver he's run away from. It's like the sort of national poster child in the 30s and 40s for enslaver and statesman. And Hayden goes on to move to Boston. He opens a clothing shop, and his house and his clothing shop are like ground zero of Underground Railroad activity. Like, one of my favorite stories about Lewis Hayden is from 1850 when William and Ellen Craft escaped enslavement. Ellen Craft was light enough skin to pass for a white, and she also dressed as a man. And her husband traveled with her as her slave. And they hide out in Lewis Hayden's shop. And in 1850, the Post-Fugitive Slave Act, enslavers had the law behind them to recoup their property. So Lewis Hayden's story goes, we don't know for sure if this is how it goes, but Hayden is in the basement of his shop. He's got William and Ellen Craft and others with him. He's got a barrel of, ammunition, a barrel of gunpowder, and he's got a match. And he's like, if you try, I will blow this whole thing up. My other favorite Lewis Hayden story is that he breaks into the constable's office in Boston in, I think it's 1853, with a few others, breaks into the jail to set a former slave free, right? So, like, not only is Hayden like writing back in 1840, like, yeah, by now you know I'm gone, kind of like a Dear John letter. Right? He then moves to Boston and is like just out with it. Everybody knows he is the one with the rifle, he's the one with the shop, and nobody touches him.
It's also wild because you just made me think of this thing. So many people were writing letters, having correspondence with their former enslavers, everything, right? I feel like at least from afar, the real revenge would just be mailing random people in the neighborhood all your former enslavers' business, right? Because then you've learned how to read, you've learned how to write, and you know all the secrets. Like, you were around. So now you just send in letters every day, revenge letters, nonstop. Just he cheating, all right, and he's cheating with your wife, and then just nonstop. It would have been an extra civil war. It would have been like county to county.
Some of that stuff kind of happens in slave narrative. Like, Frederick Douglass writes his autobiographies. In 45, he writes his first narrative, and in 55, he writes an expanded one. Harriet Jacobs writes Incidents in the Life of a Slave Girl about her former enslavers, and they're given details. Douglass uses actual names, and like when Douglass founds a newspaper, 1848, North Star. And then later, Frederick Douglass's paper, he publishes the correspondences between himself and his former enslaver. It becomes a big newspaper scandal because he's publishing the stuff. Jacobs is fun because like she spends decades like hiding in her grandmother's like attic. So she's enslaved. She escapes, but she can't get out of the neighborhood. So instead of trying to sort of hide out in the swamp or something, she hides out in this garret. And she's literate. She reads newspapers. She concocts a scheme where she writes letters to her former enslaver and then has a friend take them to New York and send them from New York. So they have a New York postmark. So she's in town looking through a peephole, a loophole at her former enslaver, getting these letters from her in New York, and then running around trying to find people who can find her in New York. And she does this kind of thing for years. She gets newspapers from New York so that she can be up on news from New York and location, so she could see that in the letters. And she's in there. It's not like living in that garret, living in that small space is torture. She has physical issues like for years after that. But I also imagine like the level of manipulation and small, baby steps revenge of sort of having him on a leash while she's right there looking at him.
Also a level of postage, because if you think about it, that's like the most expensive version of a stamp you could get. It's like, let me get somebody to go to New York to get the stamp to send it back here, just so that, and then also, hey, send me all the magazines. I want all the magazines so I know which team is winning, so I can be like, and when I see you again, tell them that the Mets. It's like having those little like things to carpet bomb drop in the letters. Wild.
William J. Wilson, right? He uses the pseudonym Ethiop and writes for Frederick Douglass's newspaper, and he's outlining in the 1850s, like you said, this dynamic. So one of the things he writes as Ethiop is that there's an entire culture built up to train white America that everything they do is good. He calls it a magnifying glass. No matter how big, no matter how small, no matter how minor, we're taught, lo and behold, it is good. It is Anglo-Saxon. It is awesome. And he essentially says we African Americans need a looking glass for ourselves. And so he's casting about. He's like, look, we need picture galleries to show pictures of Toussaint Louverture, our great figures. But he's also like, that piece you're talking about, what shall we do with the white people? Like, look, we need to do something about these people before they wreck themselves. And there's something really both fun and on some level empowering about claiming this space. Because he's claiming America as his own too, right? He claims citizenship. He's a principal. He's going to conventions. He's about life. He is actually a pretty solid capitalist, right? He's talking about opening businesses in Brooklyn. He's from Brooklyn, right? And then he writes this piece and he's reimagining U.S. history as this kind of almost viral spillage across the land. And it didn't have to be that way. Like, people made choices. The other thing about that piece is when he's writing it in 1859, one of the things I had to do when I read this stuff is block out of my mind the sense that there is a sort of inevitable civil war and emancipation is gonna happen. Because in 1859 and 1860, folks like Wilson have to be looking at history like we're moving backwards. Like if you lived in Pennsylvania, if you were born in Pennsylvania, say 1800, and were a man, you could vote. Like legally, you could vote. By 1838, they added the word white to the state constitution, kind of hustling backwards, right? By 1850, we have the Fugitive Slave Act, where judges are incentivized to find in favor of enslavers. You get Dred Scott in 1857. The Negro has no rights that the white man is bound to respect. And then in 1860-61, you get a 13th Amendment, which isn't the one we get in 65. The one in 61 is explicitly saying that the federal government has no right to interfere with the state's right to enslave people. And that thing is making its way to ratification. And I can imagine William Wilson living in Brooklyn. He's been living his life, going to conventions, helping fugitives, founding institutions, teaching Black children. And like, this is the world we have to deal with, right? How do you turn that question that Thomas Jefferson asked? Like, what can we do with enslaved people? What shall we do with the Negro? Jefferson's question. Like, that's the wrong question. What shall we do with these sort of white folk?
Yeah, I mean, well, it's also a thing of how do you function on an economic scale? How do you function a country without, like, because from the inception of the country, there were people who were like, this is not sustainable. Like this like slavery institution is not, guys, this isn't it. We can't do this forever. And just like with anything, just like the way that we treat people now, or the way we treat the climate, or the way we treat business as usual. There were people who just kept kicking the bucket because it profited them. But then, on a long enough timeline, you're not going to be able to handle this in a sustainable way. So that question that you're posing now, which is the question that's pretty much posed in the overall writing, is an important one to be asked, because it's like you do have to be saved from yourself, because you don't seem to care. It's like if you're setting the planet on fire, it won't matter how much money you have 5 years from now, because it's all going to be burning. Yeah. And the country works the same way. People work the same way. And I think that even now there's a sense of that same question and attitudes towards people. One of the reasons, and I could be wrong about this, I'm not a sociologist, and if you find me incorrect at this, like, please correct me, but I feel like one of the things that we have in our culture, even now in America, is because we never dealt with the full effects and evils of slavery. So once you get something for free, it's going to be hard to pay for it, no matter what that thing is. Once you get something that comes to little to no cost, or once something is easy, it's harder to make it hard, even across generations.
Yeah. Wilson is fun. There's like in Frederick Douglass's paper in the 1850s, there's a whole collection of Black writers who are using pseudonyms, sort of like Twitter handles. So it's not like they're anonymous. People know that Wilson is Ethiop. People know that James McCune Smith, first African-American to get a medical degree, University of Glasgow, owned a pharmacy in Manhattan. He wrote as Communipaw, like Communipaw, New Jersey. People knew he was James McCune Smith, and they knew that because Frederick Douglass, as editor, says in the newspaper, William J. Wilson is writing as Ethiop, and James McCune Smith is writing as Communipaw. So there's a whole group of people: Ethiop, Communipaw, Fanny Homewood, Observer, Cosmopolite. They had names like this, and they're writing to each other about stuff in Douglass's paper. They go into the opera together and they write about themselves and their pseudonyms. They go see the Black Swan sing. Wilson walks down the streets of Brooklyn and it's like, yeah, here's a Black business here. Here's a Black business there. By the way, that's my wife's business. Stop by. Come to Brooklyn. Don't worry about being in Manhattan. Get out of the city. We've got land here. And meanwhile, James McCune Smith is writing about his travels to Glasgow. He's writing about a man responsible for burying people in the graveyard, but who, instead of burying them in separate graves, is sort of stacking them up and reselling the plots.
Oh, what a hustle. That is insane.
So it's like, and so it's not just, abolitionist stuff, activist stuff. They're having a good time in the pages of this newspaper, joking on each other, talking about life stuff.
Yeah, well, I think that's the thing that's sometimes missing in a lot of stories of Black activism, or when Black activism is brought up in general, is just every person that engages in it is treated as one thing, and it's like one very sombering, like here's the Oscar-winning Color Purple story of their life, and then that's all they were. It's like these people were funny, they were brilliant, they were well-traveled, they were well-read, and so it is nice when you can read things that show the whole of the person, as opposed to just like, we gotta do the thing and we're gonna keep doing it and we're gonna do it till we die and we're gonna keep fighting. And it's like, as important as all of it is, and as much as it's sort of the shoulders that we're standing on to get where we are now, that's also just one aspect of their entire personality and their life's legacy. Like if you talk to the kids of any person that was an activist at any point, they can tell you so many stories that not necessarily have anything to do with activism, but have to do with like sharing the wholeness of who they were,
Yeah. Frederick Douglass, the great activist, abolitionist. There's stories of him playing the fiddle at home.
Mm-hmm.
And the kids, he's in Rochester, New York, and the kids would just gather under his window and listen to him playing the fiddle. There are other stories in Douglas's paper of Douglas making the trip down to Manhattan. And it's just a crew of men, like prominent Black men who are sort of there to hang out with their friend Frederick Douglass. And they're like, man, why are you so sad? Like, I know, like on a intellectual level and on a sort of, we know the weight you have on your shoulders, that weight you were talking about. We feel it too, but, and you got to smile. So they write about cracking jokes, singing songs just to get him to smile, to take some of the weight off of his shoulders, because they could tell that he's really feeling all the miles, all the speeches, all the just life that he's lived, right? And so these people are really keenly aware. Like Audre Lorde will say, poetry is not a luxury, right? Poetry gives us a particular sort of what she calls a distillation of light, a sense of what is possible, but also sort of a lift out of the mire, right? And so they're thinking about literature and the arts and comedy and spirituality in those same terms.
Run, Mary, run. Run, Martha, run. Run, Mary, run, I say. You've got a right to the tree of life. You've got a right to the tree of life, yeah. Run, Mary, run. Run, Martha, run. Run, Mary, run, I say. You've got a right to the tree of life. You've got a right to the tree of life, yeah. Run, Mary, run. Run, Martha, run. Run, Mary, run, I say. You've got a right to the tree of life. You've got a right to the tree of life, yeah. Run, Mary, run. Run, Martha, run. Run, Mary, run, I say. You've got a right to the tree of life. You've got a right to the tree of life, yeah. Run, Mary, run. Run, Martha, run. Run, Mary, run, I say. You've got a right to the tree of life. You've got a right to the tree of life, yeah. Run, Mary, run. Run, Martha, run. Run, Mary, run, I say. You've got a right to the tree of life. You've got a right to the tree of life, yeah. Run, Mary, run. Run, Martha, run. Run, Mary, run, I say. You've got a right to the tree of life. You've got a right to the tree of life, yeah.